The Green River in Washington state looks peaceful. Calm water, quiet banks, nothing unusual. But in the early 1980s, this river began to reveal a hidden darkness. Bodies of young women appeared one after another, pulled from the shallow water or discovered along the tree lines nearby. Each time detectives arrived, they hoped this one would finally lead them to the killer. Each time they were wrong. This is the story of Gary Ridgway, the man who would become known as the Green River Killer, one of the most prolific murderers in American history, responsible for more confirmed victims than almost any other serial killer in the United States. Ridgway wasn't a shadowy mastermind or a charismatic monster like Ted Bundy. He was something far more frightening. An ordinary man who managed to hide behind a mask of normal life for decades. Born in 1949, Gary Ridgway grew up in a dysfunctional home in Washington state. His mother was strict and controlling, and his father worked as a bus driver. Ridgway struggled in school and often felt invisible. That invisibility would later become his strongest weapon. By the time the 1980s began, Ridgway was an adult man, quiet, polite, and seemingly harmless. He worked as a truck painter at the Kenworth Company. His co-workers described him as a simple guy, sometimes strange but never dangerous. Neighbors said he smiled often and never made trouble. People trusted him, and while the city of Seattle was terrified of a serial killer dumping bodies in the river, Gary Ridgway was living a normal life, mowing his lawn, attending church, reading the Bible, and acting like the friendliest man in the neighborhood. The contradiction between who he was on the surface and what he did in the shadows is what makes his story so chilling. In the early 1980s, Seattle's highways were full of young women who were struggling to survive. Many of them were runaways, homeless teens, or girls forced into the sex trade. These were the people society protected the least, and they became the perfect targets for Gary Ridgway. Ridgway drove the same routes every day for work. He knew the areas where women waited for clients. He learned who was alone, who was desperate, who would trust the man offering them a ride. His victims weren't chosen randomly. They were chosen because he believed no one would look for them. Detectives noticed a disturbing pattern. Many victims were last seen getting into a truck or car willingly. That meant the killer looked safe, normal, non-threatening. Gary Ridgway's personality made him invisible. He didn't have charm or intelligence, but he had predictability. He appeared harmless, and that was enough. As the bodies piled up along the Green River, panic spread through the city. The press named the unknown murderer the Green River Killer, and the case quickly became one of the largest investigations in Washington state history. But the police were overwhelmed. They had almost no evidence. Many women had no stable homes or families to report them missing. Ridgway knew this. He counted on it. He would later admit that he chose victims he believed no one cared about. He said, "I killed them because I thought I could get away with it. They were easy to pick up. I didn't have to worry about them being reported missing." These words reveal the cold logic behind his crimes. He didn't kill for fame or attention. He killed because he thought he could do it forever without being caught. And for nearly 20 years, he was right. While detectives worked day and night, searching for patterns and suspects, Gary Ridgway lived a double life. During the day, he was a quiet worker with perfect attendance. He had several marriages, attended church, and tried to appear deeply religious. He even acted as a volunteer in search groups looking for missing women, including his own victims. This level of hidden cruelty shocked investigators years later. How could a man who participated in community events, who prayed at church, who smiled at neighbors, be the same man leaving bodies in the river? Ridgway had no interest in fame. He didn't want his crimes to be dramatic or theatrical. Instead, he wanted efficiency. He repeated the same method, the same approach, the same pattern, because he believed consistency would keep him from being caught. His ability to blend in made him invisible even when detectives briefly questioned him in the mid-1980s. At one point, police suspected him, but without DNA evidence, they couldn't prove anything. They took a saliva sample in 1987, but the technology wasn't advanced enough to match it. Ridgway slipped through their fingers again. He continued living a peaceful, ordinary life, a life built on lies, a life surrounded by people who never suspected the truth. By the time the 1990s arrived, the investigation had slowed down. The killer seemed to vanish, but in reality he never disappeared. He simply became more careful. Everyone believed the Green River Killer had stopped. Gary Ridgway hadn't stopped. He'd simply become smarter. And then, technology finally caught up with him. In the early 2000s, forensic science took a huge leap forward. DNA testing became highly accurate, able to match decades-old samples to specific individuals. Cold cases all across America were being reopened, and detectives in King County realized something important. They still had Gary Ridgway's saliva sample from 1987. They tested it again, this time with modern technology. The result was undeniable. Ridgway's DNA matched several victims found along the Green River. After nearly 20 years of investigation, police finally had proof. On November 30, 2001, Gary Ridgway was arrested outside the Kenworth truck factory where he had worked for decades. He didn't try to run. He didn't resist. He simply acted confused and said he didn't understand why he was being detained. But the evidence was overwhelming. As investigators questioned him, Ridgway began to talk. Not dramatically, not emotionally, just calmly, as if discussing his daily routine. He admitted he targeted women he believed no one would miss. He said killing them made him feel powerful. He claimed he couldn't remember many details because the murders had become a habit, something he did without thinking. In exchange for avoiding the death penalty, Ridgway agreed to cooperate. He led police to hidden remains, described crime scenes, and slowly confessed to more and more murders. He eventually admitted to killing over 70 women, though only 49 were formally confirmed. The truth was staggering. Gary Ridgway had been one of the most active serial killers in American history, and no one had known. In 2003, Gary Ridgway stood in court as dozens of family members of his victims stared at him. Some cried, others shouted, and some simply sat in silence, broken by years of waiting for justice. Ridgway showed little emotion. He rarely looked up. When he spoke, his voice was flat and controlled, like someone describing an ordinary task. He pleaded guilty to 48 counts of aggravated murder. The judge sentenced him to 48 life sentences, without the possibility of parole, plus hundreds of additional years. Ridgway would never leave prison again. During the sentencing, one moment stood out. A father of a murdered girl told Ridgway he forgave him. For the first time, Ridgway broke down. He cried silently, briefly. It was the only time he showed any emotion throughout the entire process. Today, Gary Ridgway is imprisoned at the Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla. He spends his days in isolation, far from the river where he committed his crimes. But his legacy remains. Ridgway is often described as the most frightening kind of killer, not because of brutality, but because of banality. He wasn't a genius. He wasn't a mastermind. He was ordinary, invisible. A man who hid in plain sight for 2 decades, destroying lives while pretending to be a friendly neighbor. His story changed how detectives approach cases involving vulnerable victims. It forced society to rethink how easily predators can hide behind normal routines. Ridgway's crimes are a reminder that monsters do not always look like monsters. Sometimes they look like the man next door,